We are back, and today is Shavuot. We are in the third month of the year 6012, and today is then Shavuot, and it's a very special day. It was the day when the column of fire that was separating the Egyptians from the Hebrews came down from heaven, and the same column that was during that time came upon Shavuot. And people then began to speak in other tongues, and tongues of fire came out of their mouths. It was obviously the anointing that came down upon them, and during that time obviously came also the functions of Ruach HaKodesh. And this was the very facet of the Father Yahweh that would come upon them as Yahshua promised. It is imperative for him to ascend to heaven, and then he would send the helper, the teacher. So he would remind his people, first the set apart people, of what Yahshua taught, and obviously the oracles, and then would remind them to be loyal to it because they were under a damn covenant. So then from the Acts, the second chapter states Shavuot, and then 50 days after then would be the people would get together, and they were at the house of prayer. The regular Bible states they were in living quarters, but it was not true. It was twisted. They were in a house of prayer. Yahshua said, wait until Shavuot, and wait until the helper would come from on high, and they were in a house of prayer. That's where they came. First in a house of prayer. And then we also understand from the scriptures the situation regarding the song of the pierced one. It is very evident at the time when the celebrations they were ended, there was a person that would come from the Israelites, a brother of theirs, and would sing the song of the pierced one. It was a tiny flute with 5 holes in it, and symbolize our Mashiach, that he died on a stake and he had 5 holes. And this is where the blowing, the rushing wind comes from the song of the pierced one. So it's a very interesting time of the year, the time when people they come together and they celebrate the coming of Ruach HaKodesh, and most importantly, in heaven there was also celebration because he came down, the very promised help, and his help would help his people. And then obviously there was the spiritual line set in the planet. And this is the fact that people sometimes these days they don't understand. It was truly set, a spiritual line that would maintain the guys outside of the camp. It was not only the fact they would receive the gospel, the great news of the link that was broken from the time of Adam. They had to be maintained. And then their spirits would be linked with this spiritual line that was set in Shavuot. And the existing line is extremely contaminated. It was clean at first, but then when the people they were not loyal to what Moses said, and most importantly of what Yahshua said, then this spiritual line began to be extremely contaminated, and demons got in it, and it must be cleared away and cleansed. So then we begin to understand what it means when Yahshua said, those who are grafted in him, they are like branches grafted in a vine. It was not only the fact that it was some sort of a thought of a plant that was planted and then would grow this plant and then would be grafted branches outside. It was a spiritual understanding. He made a shadow picture of it. As in every area of the scriptures, every understanding of it also has a shadow picture of it. That's why it's a very important understanding. And then the guys would be outside doing the work. They would be living by faith. From every word Yahshua said, they would be living by faith. What did the dear brothers from the Israelites did when they received the laws from the mountain. They were living by each word spoken. And then later, the goys, they would live by faith. This means living by the every word that Yahshua said would be more important than eating. Living by faith. Each word spoken, living by faith. And then when they were saved, then they repented of their sins, and they would wash themselves with the holy dam of Yahshua, and then they would be mikvahd, and by that time their spirits were relinked, and then it had to be relinked somewhere where they would get nourishment from. Could they go on themselves only reading the word? No. There was a spiritual line set when Shavuot came. So their spirits would be linked with the spiritual line set on the planet. And they would be quietly doing the work outside, living by faith. Because the guys, they can't teach, they can't preach, they can't heal, they can't prophesy, they can't exercise the functions, they don't have the senses, but they have to be linked. And this linking in the spiritual line that was set in Shavuot was linked with the Kadosh Kadoshim of the camp. So then when the priests, they would rotate and minister to Yahshua, would maintain the spiritual line clear and clean. This is what it means. Himself was the vine, and then the others were the branches. If they are linked in Him, linked, then they would survive. They would bear works of justice. Otherwise they would wither. So it's not only going around reading His words and then they think it would have some sort of power in them because Ruach HaKodesh can't live in them. He only influences from the outside, but then He is not the link. The link would be themselves being linked with the spiritual line of Shavuot. It was set in Shavuot. And then Ruach HaKodesh would simply influence them. But the existing line is extremely contaminated. Because those areas of maintenance, they were neglected. So as then they return to the original state, then the normal would be for the priests to minister to the Yahweh Yeshua, and then the maintenance of these prayers in rotation as it was before. There was no distinction, neither a change, or except for the completion of the dam of animals that was substituted by the dam of Yahshua Himself. The rest remained the same. And they would maintain the prayers and maintain the spiritual line in the world outside clear. So every new believer in Yahshua would then repent, would wash themselves with His holy dam. The sins then were gone, their link was established, and then their link established would be linked with the spiritual line in the world, maintained by the priests ministering to Yahshua in the Kadosh Kadoshims. This is what it means of being grafted in a vine. It was a shadow picture. So this is a very time of a celebration and understanding the importance, because then every word when they speak in themselves, they can sense that they are part of the family. They are not yet selected to go into the camp, but they are linked. They understand as long as they read, and then of course they show up at the gate often. Because then it's not only reading and maintaining, it's also receiving from heaven. Besides these, there are instructions, there are, for instance, prophecies, there are directions for the future, and those must be received. At certain point, Ruach HaKodesh may decide to have other guys from the outside. They have to have some sort of a future plan. When Yahshua was hiring his disciples, he did not merely say, please come over, as the regular Bible states. It was ridiculous. He had to provide them first. For instance, when he was hiring the fishermen, Shimon, and the others that were from the fishing industry, the huge catch they had was the provision for the time that they would spend in the ministry. He provided prior of them releasing their nets. They caught so much fish that they were able to get their dues paid for, and then the oil for the families and the provisions for the time that they had the ministry, 490 days. So there are steps of formation. And then it states that they were in their duty posts, and Yahshua then came over and said, come after me. He didn't say, come after me. He said, come after me after hours. He was not going to violate the existing work that the people were engaged in. Did he not say when he saw the coin that was brought to him, what is this face? Caesar's. Okay, give it to him what belongs to him, and Yahweh Yahweh's. The principle remained. And the Bible out there is very twisted. He would never ask his people to leave their duty posts. So similarly, we can understand when his people are involved, they must have guidelines for them so then they can be joined into the camp. And this takes sometimes a word sometimes of prophecy, a word of knowledge, a word of wisdom, a word of direction. And then they have to prepare themselves. And this then is maintained by their reading, and then they are linked with the spiritual line set in Shavuot. So let me ask you this. How would the priests maintain the ministry of Yahshua Nikadosh Kadoshim, and then would have a direct contact in heaven, and how would they be linked with the guys outside of the camp? They would have to have some sort of a link with them to know what was going on. If there was no link from the Kadosh Kadoshims, the people of the camp, and the guys outside, how would they know what were they going through? Would they have to write a Megillah every time there was a problem? No, they were linked with the spiritual line. They would understand in the spirit what was going on outside of the camp. And then obviously, Ruach HaKodesh would direct him as such, because Ruach HaKodesh knows the future, he understands what's coming, and then he directs his set-apart people so they can shepherd the people outside, as the perfect shepherd did when he did his duty while in the earth. This is what Shavuot means. The spiritual line and the maintenance thereof through the functions. But we don't have the entire scope of understanding because those Megillas, they were destroyed and burned. But 11,760 hours of ministry a person can understand. Well, that's part of the rest of it, isn't it? And then later on, during the time of Shaul, he said very clearly, yet myself not in person, myself with you in the spirit, in the spiritual line. He wasn't saying in Ruach HaKodesh, because Ruach HaKodesh could not inhabit the goys. They were not trained. But they had the influence of him. And the influence of him would work through the set-apart people. So then comes the context of placing what is set apart. They had a direct link from Ruach HaKodesh. And then the goys, they were outside of the camp. They were being shepherded. This situation of they are the same and they were then mixed up, that's demonic. It must be cleared away. Goys were goys. They were having the influence of Ruach HaKodesh outside. It can come in many forms. It can come sometimes when people they are reading the Word. They sense direction from reading the Word. Or they have direction sometimes from another brother. But Ruach HaKodesh himself can't live in them because they are not trained. They are not exercised. That's why Yahshua, when he came, he said, wait at the house of prayer, because Ruach HaKodesh, the helper, is coming. And Ruach HaKodesh speaks in Hebrew, because it's the only holy language. Shaul said, whatsoever is done, let it be done in order. And then when Shaul was doing the work of the ministry, he was outside, and then he plainly said, myself not in person, yet myself in a spirit. Had a direct link from him, his set apart people, the Kadosh Kadoshims, and heaven. But not the goys. The goys were being shepherded. That's why they don't have the link in a total sense from Ruach HaKodesh. There is not a direct link from Ruach HaKodesh. There is a link from the spiritual line placed in the world. So then they can link themselves with the vine. But then people go around and sometimes they are using witches in their own languages, expecting to receive direction from heaven, and they simply deceive themselves. They get directions from the inferno, from the dark world, because they request guide from the spiritual dark places rather than Ruach HaKodesh. Obviously because they're outside of the camp. Shaul said, whatsoever is done, let it be done in order. So then what is the next step? It is very simple. Our dear brothers, Hebrews should return to their camps and resume the work started in Shavuot when the spiritual line was given. Goys outside are dumb animals. That's why Yahshua compared. And the animals that they were dealing with, they were very docile. If they would not move them, they would not move. The Creator made this way for a reason. They had to be constant being shepherded around. And any kind of goy outside of the camp thinking they have some sort of a guidance on their own, they are demonic. They must be linked with the spiritual line set in Shavuot and quietly remaining in the vine. They simply do the work outside of the camp and making sure the camp is provided. That's their work. The rest is receiving teaching until they are drawn into the camp to form another group, and then the entire group would go out and form another holy land. This is what it means. This is what was established at Shavuot at the first. The spiritual line before that time of Shavuot was unavailable. They had to be absolutely, in a total sense, loyal to the laws of Moses. They were laws of demands. It had to be done in a certain way or no way. Later it changed. And this is the portion that Yahshua did also explain. But it was not recorded in the codex that we have today. But it's very easily understandable because 11,760 hours of ministry, including his resting time, it is truly a long time. So this is what it means. While the gates are closed, they are maintained through prayer in the Kadosh Kadoshims. And then the priests, they know what's going on outside of the camp. They understand what's going on. They don't have understanding of the dark world. That's junk. That belongs to the outside world. They don't have any kind of a dirty visions out there. They have a clear understanding what's going on with the goys, with those that are saved. So they are maintained quietly in the vine. Much more coming up.